And now back to 80/20 estate planning. Here's your host, estate planning expert, Al Gibbons.
Welcome back to Planning for Business Owners, and welcome back to my guest, Brian Titus from Phoenix Home Life in Hartford, Connecticut, and Michael Haney of Haney and Hecht in Great Valley, Pennsylvania, Malvern, Pennsylvania. Is that right, Mike? Is
That's
it
right, Al.
Mailing address? Okay, good. Just before the break, we were talking about business owners wanting income, security, and control. These are obviously big issues that we've all run into with our clients. Additionally, we talked, Mike brought up this issue of doing this planning for business owners, and that it's really a lifetime process. But sometimes, Mike, we don't have a lifetime. One of the contingencies that we have is premature death of a business owner who hasn't gotten around to completing his plan and doing all the things that he wanted to do. When do you deal with that?
Al, we deal with that as one of the first things that we deal with is we tell the client that we will plan for their lifetime. And if we plan for their life expectancy, then we are fully confident that we can minimize their estate taxes, pass their business on to the next generation, if that's what they choose to do, and if the next generation wants the business, that we can do that. And if there are other partners in the business, pass it on to them. So what we deal with initially is we say, okay, now, what's our worst case scenario is that you die sooner rather than later. And there it's important to have a buy-sell in place if there are a number of family members. It's important to have the will in place, all the things that you need in place to make sure the business goes where you want it to go if a member dies. And then we need to fund. And what we tell the client is we will plan for a lifetime and insure against the worst case.
Okay, that makes sense to me. It seems to me, though, if I'm your client, Mike, we're planning for a lifetime. But geez, it seems to me like I have to make some pretty important decisions if I have to deal with this contingency of death. Is all that stuff binding, and does it affect my other planning during lifetime, or is it sort of a backup plan in case I die?
Well, it's binding as soon as the client dies. To the extent, if you have a will, you can change it any time before you die. But once you die, that's the plan.
So I don't have to be overly intimidated by just locking myself into things that I can't change.
No, in fact, even when we draft irrevocable trusts, that is, trusts that are not revocable, you'd be surprised how you can make a irrevocable trust very, very, very flexible.
I do like hearing that.
And so everything that we do is very, very flexible.
Okay, and that seems like the imperative in all of this is providing for some flexibility. As my desire as a business owner, my desires regarding income and security and control, as we've talked about, as those things are changing and growing and developing. Brian, when we are going to plan for these contingencies of premature death, how do we do it? What are those agreements out there? What do we do? What are our choices?
Well, first thing is probably some kind of an agreement that will provide for the sale or the transfer of the stock in the event of death. And again, it probably the choices are going to depend on exactly what kind of business we have, whether it's a family business with children as the logical successors, or we have another kind of business where children are not the logical successors. It's either business partners or key employees. And so an agreement, some kind of an agreement or written plan is usually what's required. And in the case of a non-family business, some kind of a written plan either between the owner and the corporation or business itself, or between the owner and other owners or other key employees, a written agreement in which the decedent's estate is obligated to sell and the other parties are obligated to purchase is the first and fundamentally the document that gets that done. Then, of course, the buyers in any case, especially the case of the non-family business, have to have the money to pay for it, and you certainly have to think about ways that's going to be funded. We in the life insurance business take a lot of comfort in the fact that life insurance, whether it's term insurance or whole life, it will depend on the circumstances, is certainly one of the easiest and most convenient ways of doing that, but it's not always the solution. There may be in cases where individuals are uninsurable. So maybe some combination of installment notes and borrowing, although that may not be the most attractive funding option in a lot of cases, maybe the only option in some cases. So that combination of having a written plan, a written agreement, plus properly funded one seems to be the two key ingredients.
So I guess what you're saying is if I'm the business owner and something happens to me, I want to make sure that my estate is obligated to sell my interest, but I want to create a market where there's money to buy my interest. And if the money's not over there, then we either have to establish a sinking fund or we have to do some other things that you mentioned or have life insurance on my life owned by my partners, whoever else it is, so they can buy out the interest. Is that
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. Does it make any difference whether I'm a regular C corporation or an S corporation or an LLC or a sole proprietor?
Well, it has some effect because business owners, and Mike can probably speak to this better than I can, but business owners are always looking to fund or pay for whatever it is they're doing in the most efficient manner. And certainly the respective tax brackets of the business and the individual are sometimes an issue. Sometimes they're a very important issue. Sometimes they're a secondary issue, but it's often an issue. So whether or not the business is the entity that's either paying life insurance premiums or putting money aside in a sinking fund, or whether the individuals are doing it outside the business on an after-tax basis, that's going to have an effect. Whether the business is a C Corp or an S Corp or more frequently a limited liability company these days will also have some effect on exactly where the money flows and who pays what. So it's off. And now those situations are going to vary greatly and from fact pattern to fact pattern and from entity to entity. But those are important issues in many cases.
Well, then, Mike, it seems to me we're back with these variables that we're talking about. We're trying not to get too complex here. It does seem to me that we're back to saying we better be dealing with expertise.
Well, that's right, Al. And again, there's always you're running on parallel lines. Number one is you've got to say to the client, okay, now, who gets the business after you die? And whenever there is a non-family co-owner of the business, number one, there needs to be a shareholders agreement, a partnership agreement, some agreement as to what happens when someone dies, and any other number of issues. There could be disability if someone's a key employee. So there are business issues that have to be addressed. And then the tax structure should be the most efficient that does not interfere with the business issues. And that's why you have the expert.
Great. One of the things that comes to mind when we're talking about doing these agreements and these buy-sell arrangements, as they're often called in the business, is I have to know what my business is worth. And, Mike, you talked a little bit about that up front, and I'd like to come back after the break and see how we determine what these businesses are worth. So let's do that right after the break.
80/20 Estate Planning will return after these short messages. Mortality. Who dwells on it? But when it comes to planning your estate, it's never too early to start. For smart ways to get the most from your estate and planning team, you need to hear Al Gibbons, creator of the heralded 80/20 Estate Plan. Implement 80% of the planning you need in 20% of the time it normally takes, from A to Z in 60 days. Contact AEG Financial Services today at 610-917-8940 or email them at algibbons@algibbons.com for more information about Al's expert services and related products. Al Gibbons of AEG Financial Services is a highly respected expert in the complicated and often confusing world of estate planning. Put his years of experience in dealing with real situations to work for you. Contact AEG Financial Services today. Call 610-917-8940. That's 610-917-8940. Or email algibbons@algibbons.com.
How many fingers do I show in this hand?
1, 2, 3.
That's right, 3 fingers. How many do I show in this hand?
1, 2.
Good. 2 fingers. Now, how many in both hands together?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Great. 3 plus 2 equals 5. Little children love math, and we can teach them in odd moments if we know what to do. I even teach restless children on supermarket lines. To learn how you can nurture children's native math ability and joy, buy my new book, Math Power, How to Help Your Child Love Math Even If You Don't, at your local bookstore. I'm Dr. Pat Kenchak, and I love teaching children and adults about math. Ask for Math Power at your local bookstore.
Today's money. It's not just who you are, it's what you're made of. It's not just having a name, it's making one. Not just being, but creating. In fact, 8 out of 10 today's millionaires aren't inheriting their money, they're earning it. That's not just evolution, that's revolution. And one company understands how money has changed, and that company is Phoenix. Call 1-888-456-3451 or visit us at phoenixwm.com, because money is not what it used to be.
Having trouble building relationships with your coworkers? Maybe your relationships with your spouse or children aren't what they ought to be. Well, every Monday at 1 p.m., Dr. T will be here to help. Life Management is the name of the show, and Dr. T is your host. And he's dedicated to getting you, the listener, back in tune with your life, love, and relationships. Only you can manage your life, but a little help never hurts. So tune in to WALE 990 every Monday afternoon at 1 for Life Management with your host, Dr.
Talk to our expert host. In the Providence area, call 621-WALE. Outside the Providence area, call toll-free 1-877-621-WALE.
And now back to 80/20 Estate Planning. Here's your host, estate planning expert, Al Gibbons.
Welcome back to Planning for Business Owners. Welcome back to Brian Titus and Michael Haney, both outstanding attorneys with specialties in business planning. Mike and Brian, we were talking before the break about business continuation agreements, about funding those agreements either with life insurance or setting money aside in a sinking fund or other strategies. But it made me think about how do you value these businesses? What are the issues involved with valuations? And does it make any difference whether it's a family-owned business that you're passing to your children or whether it's business partners doing it between themselves? Mike, what's your experience in this area? How do you deal with these issues?
Well, it certainly makes a difference whether there are unrelated owners and whether it is a business that's being passed down to the family. And when the business is being passed down the family, the incentive is usually to lower the value of the business so that it can get passed down at the least expensive transfer tax cost. When there are unrelated parties that own the business, I always say it's easy to do a shareholders agreement because particularly when you have both healthy individuals involved, because what goes one way goes the other way. So that means people tend then to try to find a fair agreement. And
often referred to as an arm's length agreement?
It is an arm's length agreement, and the IRS, from a tax perspective, we have less concern about what value is placed on that business because the thought is, and the IRS generally follows the rule, is that when you have independent third parties, neither of them is trying to benefit the other's family. and to make a gift to them. So they're trying to come up with what is a fair price, and that is generally respected. I say generally, it's not, I have seen occasions where we have had to battle with the IRS to get them to accept that, but they eventually did in the case of a third party. In the case of a family valuation, the IRS is not going to respect the buy-sell value. Okay. But then going back to the unrelated business owners, again, it's a little easier because they're not trying to benefit the other, and they're trying to come up with a fair price.
So it's sort of what we would say in that case, Mike. That sort of pegs the value for federal estate tax purposes.
That's correct.
Sort of a guiding principle, but yet there's this potential conflict where somebody may want to pass down family line at much less cost because of the less estate taxes and so forth. So the IRS, as you say, doesn't necessarily honor that.
That's correct.
So what I see often, Brian, is I see valuation firms, appraisers, come in or be called in to do the valuations. Is that what you see?
Absolutely. And I would second Mike's comments about we get to review stockholder agreements and buy-sell agreements quite often here, and I would say that in the vast majority of cases involving unrelated individuals, businesses with unrelated owners, that more often than not the values will be established by the parties on a basis, annually or every other year. And if they fail to agree in any particular time, the agreements typically provide for some other mechanism for arriving at a fair value. On the other hand, in the family business, and probably the most notable cases in the last few years have involved the transfers of family businesses, often will require some expertise, some independent third party, an adequate appraisal to establish that value, because the IRS is skeptical that any family member is attempting to pass the business at a lower than fair market value.
So the question then becomes, or I guess the opportunity here, Mike, is that you may get a valuation prior to doing this buy-sell agreement, or you may get it at death. You may have some kind of formula or plan for doing that and getting appraised at that stage. Is that correct?
The problem with getting the valuation at the time of the buy-sell agreement is we expect the buy-sell agreement to last a long time. We expect that a party is not going to die sooner rather than later. So the appraisal can get stale rather quickly if you get it at the time that you do the buy-sell agreement. What we typically do is there are several ways you can value the business in a buy-sell agreement. Number one is you can say, okay, if the parties agree to a value, they can agree to the value now and say if one of the parties dies, this is the value of our business. If you take that approach, you must update that value regularly.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't update it regularly, you have to have a fallback position, and that could be hire an appraiser. That could be some industry formula. They all have their advantages and disadvantages.
Well, I understand that there's some complexity here, and there's certainly some inconvenience here. But we're also talking with what we've described as often the most valuable asset in the estate. And it seems to me that we need to give it its just due, whether or not it's inconvenient. We need to do it right. We need to find some strategies for doing it practically, and it seems that both of you have had that experience and that wisdom to get your clients through that process so that you can get to the next stage. And let's talk about the next stage right after this next break.
80/20 Estate Planning will return after these short messages. Mortality. Who dwells on it? But when it comes to planning your estate, it's never too early to start. For smart ways to get the most from your estate and planning team, you need to hear Al Gibbons, creator of the heralded 80/20 Estate Plan. Implement 80% of the planning you need in 20% of the time it normally takes, from A to Z in 60 days. Contact AEG Financial Services today at 610-917-8940 or email them at Al Gibbons at algibbons.com for more information about Al's expert services and related products. Al Gibbons of AEG Financial Services is a highly respected expert in the complicated and often confusing world of estate planning. Put his years of experience in dealing with real situations to work for you. Contact AEG Financial Services today. Call 610-917-8940. That's 610-917-8940. Or email algibbons at algibbons.com. Are you looking for ways to help teach your children to be financially responsible? Well, look no further. Neil Godfrey is one of the New York Times best-selling authors. Her books, The Ultimate Kids Money Books and Money Doesn't Grow on Trees, help kids learn about money and help parents to raise financially responsible children. Neil Godfrey's books are great for children or gift ideas. Order yours today at Amazon.com. The Ultimate Kids Money Book and Money Doesn't Grow on Trees should be an essential part of your child's library. Teaching your children about financial responsibility at a young age is a big step toward creating good habits for later years. So don't put it off. Order your copies of these great books today.
Money. It's just not what it used to be. Among other things, it's younger. But new money and old money have at least one thing in common. Phoenix, a company that's been helping people manage wealth for nearly 150 years. Phoenix understands that making money and knowing what to do with it are two very different skills. Call 1-888-456-3451 or visit us at phoenixwm.com. We could bring harmony to your life, if not to your music.
Warning, the following message is for teens only.
Fasten your seatbelts. Make sure your tray tables are in their full upright and locked position, and get ready for Teen Talk every Saturday night from 6 to 8 p.m. Your host, Sean, and his guests will take you on a 2-hour ride through adolescence, discussing anything and everything a teenager in the new millennium would dream of talking about. Music, current events, high school issues of the day, and more. Teen Talk is interesting and outrageous at the same time, so tune in Saturday nights at 6 and join Sean and his gang on Teen Talk right here on 990 WALE.
You're listening to Southern New England's Talk Alternative, offering the most unique program, 990 WALE, Renaissance Radio.
And now back to 80/20 estate planning. Here's your host, estate planning expert, Al Gibbons.
Welcome back to our listeners. My name is Al Gibbons, your host. Also would like to welcome back Mike Haney, Malvern, Pennsylvania, one of the really excellent attorneys here in the suburb of Philadelphia, and also Brian Titus from Phoenix Home Life in Hartford, Connecticut. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us today. We have been talking about planning for the business owner and continuation of the business, and we've just sort of come to the end of the show. We've sort of raced through it, Brian and Mike, but we were talking about valuations. And when we talk about funding these obligations for buy-sell agreements and so forth, Brian, how do you pick often what is an amount of insurance, as Mike had brought up, how do you pick the amount of insurance to accomplish the goals?
Well, first, is in many cases, the value is going to be set or at least estimated by the owners, and we obviously need a number to complete this part of the process. So you're going to be required, the owners are going to be required to, at the very least, make a good guesstimate of what the value is, and then insurance will be purchased in that amount. Now,
and Brian, before you go further, Mike, you have a question that you ask of your business owners when you're trying to get an estimate. What is it? How do you get to that number?
It's it's actually two questions, Al. Is one, would you sell the business for that price?
Okay.
And then if they say certainly I would in a minute, then the second question I ask is, would you buy it for that price?
Okay, so you try to hone in on it that way. And would you say that 80 or 90% of the time, Mike, that you can get to a pretty estimate?
I would say so. It's interesting when you deal with the business owners. Yeah. They tend to be on the same page, and that's why they have a successful business. Yeah. The problem comes in, and why you need to have these agreements and these things in place, is that, in my experience, the business owners tend to agree, and the heirs somehow who weren't even involved in the business always think the business is worth a lot more.
Good point, Mike. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, Brian. Back to picking then this amount.
Right, and if that value is selected by owners that are on the same page, then that part of the process becomes relatively easy. That's not to say that life insurance is always you always fully fund the agreement with life insurance. It may be possible that for some reason or other you can't buy enough life insurance, and so you do half the amount and make up the difference with installment obligations of some kind, but generally speaking, though, the number will be determined in some reasonable fashion.
So like many planning scenarios, often the solutions are not either or, they're a combination of strategies.
Sure.
Real quickly, we've talked about the business owner dying. What if the business owner is disabled? Mike, what do you do?
Well, that's it. Again, it depends on the business owner and the business. So if you've got a key service person and they become disabled, that now is a business question. Okay, we've lost a key salesperson, we've lost a key executive.
Right.
How do we deal with that? And often, particularly in startup businesses, the deal is we're both going to work in this business, and when you got to replace that person, you have to find some way of compensating.
So you have a replacement for the business earnings, and you probably have replacement of income to the family.
That's right.
And there better at least be some, and I think, Mike, I'm right in saying this, there has to be some kind of documentation and writing on how you're going to handle this, either in the corporate minutes or something like that. Is that correct?
That should be part of the buy-sell agreement.
Okay. Gentlemen, we have really covered a lot of territory today. I can't tell you how much I appreciate both of you being with me. I do want to thank you for that, and I think it's provided our listeners with great value. Additionally, before we leave, I want to thank Phoenix Home Life for its sponsorship of this program. I am an independent insurance and financial advisor, and yet I have the opportunity to use Phoenix Home Life often, and it's one of the finest companies in the industry. Thank you to Phoenix Home Life. Thank you to my guests, and thank you for my listeners being here.
Thank you, Al.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to 80/20 Estate Planning with your host, Al Gibbons. You can tune in to our live broadcast every Tuesday at 4 p.m. If you would like to contact Al Gibbons, you may email him at algibbons@algibbons.com or mail your questions and comments to AEG Financial Services, The Commons at Valley Forge, 1288 Valley Forge Road, number 53, Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, 19460-2681. Please join us again next week.